if they want more of God, um, He's got more to offer. So I think they can press in, they can see what's right for them, where they can serve.
Nate, thanks for coming out. I appreciate it. I know you're super, super busy being at the helm of Black Catholic Messenger. And as I've mentioned off camera, you seem to have a brand new article or two every day, which my mind can't even comprehend that level of output. But before we dive into all that amazing work that you've been doing the last few years, I want to start at the beginning. I want to hear a bit about your faith journey. I want to hear about, are you a cradle Catholic, a convert, a revert? Where does your journey begin?
Yeah, so definitely a convert. I was not raised Catholic at all. Uh, in my younger years, I was not a fan of Catholicism at all,
Mm.
and that kind of intensified as I got older. But I guess yeah, that's the kind of people who are maybe most susceptible in the end to becoming Catholic.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah. Why the harsh aversion in your younger years?
it's probably just mostly the weird dynamics of my hometown. It was kind of, in my mind at least, divided into like one side of town is Catholic and the other side of town is not so Catholic, and you didn't necessarily like the Catholic side of town. And there was cultural, racial convergence there as well. So for various reasons, I just felt like the Catholic kids who went to the Catholic schools were different, and they felt they were different. So once I started to learn even the slightest thing about the theology behind the difference between Protestant and Catholic, I was kind of like very, very opposed to anything that I perceived to be Catholic, and even people I perceived to be Catholic, which wasn't super healthy, but yeah,
Yeah,
that kept
yeah.
me Protestant
Where
for
where
a
was
good while.
your hometown?
Evansville, Indiana.
Okay. Yeah. So you're coming from a space where all things Catholic is a big no-no. Like, how did you get to where you are? What was it that drew you in? Because I'm one thing I've noticed about converts or reverts, like myself, I could share a bit about that later. We have the three transcendentals: the truth, the goodness, and the beauty. And I'm curious to know which of those arrested your heart and kind of like tugged you along, or planted that seed and tugged you along.
It was definitely truth first. Um, I was
Mm,
raised in a lot of different Protestant denominations, and then I joined several more on my own volition as an adult. So I had kind of seen the width and breadth of Protestantism, specifically evangelicalism. And
gotcha.
when I
Like
kind
a
of,
non-denominational, like mega church, or
well,
more of like,
that was one of them. Yeah, I was like
gotcha.
four different kinds of Baptist, non-denominational, Methodist, neo-Pentecostal, all kinds of things.
Wow.
And
You, yeah.
yeah, I feel like I saw it all. And eventually I kind of came to the end of my rope with it. Not because any one of them was like particularly deficient, but just spiritually, I came to a point where I needed something else, and I wasn't able to find it in any of those places. So I kind of had this hunger for what original Christianity was like, and like I mean, like first century, like what when the apostles and the disciples got together, what did they do? And I tried to find that somewhere in Protestantism, specifically in evangelicalism, and I wasn't able to do that. But yeah, somehow I stumbled upon first Eastern Orthodoxy here in San Francisco when I was in 2018, and that really fascinated me, got me interested more in traditional sources of church history, and from there I started meeting with the priests and really got into, well, I realized that I wasn't going to be a Protestant anymore, but I wasn't totally decided on what I was going to become. I was thinking about becoming Orthodox, and then my friends, many of whom were Catholics, said, "You should become Catholic." And I was like, well, they're not that different,
Yeah.
are they? And so then I decided to dive into that. And eventually, yeah, the truth of Catholicism really drew me in. It's like the most salient explanation of the church and of the faith and everything that's happened since Jesus
Mhm.
went back to heaven.
That's quite the journey, and one that really resonates with me. I'm I thought this is going to sound funny. I actually thought I was a convert initially,
Mm,
but it turns out I was a revert. When my now wife, when we were discussing marriage and that sort of thing, she expressed the importance of the Catholic Church.
mm,
She grew up in it, and although I did go to Catholic high school, but I went because my mom told me I had to go to. So I was like, okay, they have better academics, sure, I'll
yeah.
go begrudgingly. The priest that I met there didn't really care for him. Nothing he did. I was just, I don't like you, like just very, so sort of like it sounds similar to your experience and going along. And yours was truth that drew you in. I think mine was the goodness. The priest that she introduced me to, Father Toby, and he, here in Canada, we had, or Kitchener specifically, had this big snowstorm, and he opened up the doors to the church, to the homeless, to people addicted to drugs, prostitutes, pimp. Like, you pull a biblical character, they had pulled them into the church, and seeing how they served them, even though they broke into upstairs, stole things, he was just like, okay, we're still here to serve. We're still here to help and love. And even though I had been meeting with him and I was doing RCIA, that's what captured me. And I was like, oh, this is that love that they always talk about. So I understand that big sort of journey, and it, like you said, the ones who seem to be most adamant against it then become these major proponents. Because so once you decided to be Catholic versus Orthodox, which is interesting, I've heard that sort of that ping ponging one. Actually, let me dive into that. I'm curious, what made you decide to go the route of the Latin Rite versus going Eastern Orthodox? Was there like a particular um, rite, or is there a particular book, or what was it that made you tip the scales to go that way?
So the transition wasn't actually immediately from Eastern Orthodoxy to the Latin, right? It was actually from Eastern Orthodoxy to Eastern Catholicism, uh, because even after I decided that I wanted to be Catholic, I still liked the Eastern liturgy and theology because it kind of made more sense to me as a very anti-Catholic Protestant who wasn't going to be able to receive Catholicism in the way that it's traditionally presented. So when I was receiving it in an Eastern way, which can be contrasted with the Western view in many ways, yeah, it just made way more sense to me. I wasn't as opposed to that because I never heard of it before. I didn't know anything about Eastern Christians of any type before
Yeah.
before that, really, which is crazy because I had a degree in religion and we definitely learned about Eastern Orthodoxy, but I didn't retain any.
Really?
Yeah,
That's funny. Yeah, I looked on your LinkedIn. I saw that you went to Pepperdine, and I was curious to know like the your academic journey through there. So that's interesting that you had touched on it ever so briefly, but it was just like type of thing.
yeah, I'm pretty sure we read a whole book about it, or at least a book that had a huge section about it, but it did not. I did not process that. So when I encountered it like in real life, religiously,
Mm.
as an adult, as an older adult, um, yeah, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And so once I latched onto that, it was like, yeah, I love this. I'm sticking with this. That didn't necessarily last. I went from Eastern Catholicism to the Latin Rite eventually, but that was more of a cultural thing than it was like something I felt like I had had to do. But yeah, choosing between Eastern Orthodoxy and Catholicism writ large was mostly just coming to accept the authority of the Pope, and you kind of have to pick about what you think happened when the church split in the Great Schism. Like, oh, I had to I had to pick one or the other, and I was tipped towards Catholicism partially by the fact that I found out that there were Black Catholic parishes, and actually discovered my own grandparents were Catholic. I never met them.
Really?
Yeah, my biological
Yeah.
grandparents, who I never met, I learned that they were Catholic, and I was like, yeah, I can return to a family tradition by converting to
The,
Catholicism. So that was part of it.
the, Yeah, it's interesting when we dig into our roots and history kind of pops up to let us know that we're coming home. In fact, like
Bingo.
when I mentioned a bit of my RCIA journey, I was I'd always thought we were some sort of Baptist denomination because that's the few times I did go to church, it was like with a Baptist denomination, or maybe my dad's side, the Anglican, thought it was somewhere in there. And my grandmother looks at me and she's like, I know you're Catholic. Oh, yes, my family's Jamaican, by the way.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, no, Grandma, why would I know this? You've had my birth certificate, my baptismal certificate my whole life. So I saw it. I was like, oh, I guess I'm a revert, not a convert. So I know what you mean in that journey, and that's interesting. A lot of Protestants I know who convert. It's the papal supremacy always is a thing to get over, but I'm glad you found your way home, and along the way you just found out your family roots. But here's something that's interesting: is the fact that you did your journey, but like you went in pretty hard. You went in pretty hard. So when I first actually encountered you, it was through Reddit of all places. You had some posts around Black Catholicism, and I was kind of coming into my faith at that point because I've only been Catholic. This is now 5 years for me. So when I saw your post about Black Catholicism, I found it really interesting. Read up a bit more and learned a bit about you, and also learned at that time that you were discerning the Josephites. Can you tell me how you you went from being a convert to discerning the priesthood, and maybe tell folks who aren't really familiar with the Josephites who they are, what their charism is, and what attracted you to this process.
Yeah. So I was, as I mentioned, when I started considering Catholicism as opposed to Eastern Orthodoxy, a lot of it had to do with culture, and so I was reading a lot about the history of Black Catholics. I previously felt like there weren't any Black Catholics, and that was part of the reason I was so opposed to the Catholic Church. But as I started to read
Mm.
more and more of the history of uh, U.S. Catholicism, I learned that Black Catholics have been around a very long time, centuries, and they have pockets all over the country where they were particularly strong. Um, so as I learned more about that, I learned about the Josephites. They were like, without the Josephites, the Black Catholic community in the United States today would be totally different. I'm sure a lot smaller. They were from a British religious order that came over at the behest of the Pope in the mid to late 19th century, the Mill Hill Fathers. So after the enslaved African Americans were freed in the Emancipation Proclamation, the Pope was like, well, all these people are going to need some missionary efforts for the ones who are Catholic and the ones who aren't Catholic. Um, so the Mill Hill Fathers came over and started opening parishes and schools and just generally serving African Americans, which at the time was not the only thing that that order did because they had operations overseas as well. But in 1893, the ones who had come over, some of the ones who had come over, decided to form their own religious order and ended up calling themselves the Josephites, and they were dedicated exclusively to serving African Americans. So they've been operating here for over 125 years, and many of the black parishes in the Deep South were founded by the Josephites, especially in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, also Texas. And they also have operations in the DC area, Baltimore. They used to be in the Northeast in New York, and they're also on the West Coast now in Los Angeles. They used to have even more stuff all over the Midwest included. So it's a short history of them. But as I read about them in books, I was like, that's really fascinating. I had previously wanted to become a minister in the Protestant church, or like a Protestant minister of some sort. I didn't really know what. I was in a Baptist seminary for a semester, and had still considered going in down that road. So when I became Catholic, I was like, well, I'm single, and I know Catholics have to be celibate to become priests, and I was like, well, no problem, I can do that. And so I started to discern whether I should become a priest uh, pretty soon after I converted. And a few months
Wow.
after I was confirmed, I moved to New Orleans, where the Josephites actually work. And one of the places where they work, I think they have the most parishes in that city than any other city. But
Mhm.
I met a Josephite priest for the first time. That was early 2020. Then the pandemic happened, which I guess caused a lot of people to make super drastic decisions. And mine, I guess, was to apply for the priesthood. uh, I remember, I think the day I met with the vocations director, like turning in an application, was the day the lockdown started in New Orleans, like out of
Oh
nowhere.
wow.
Yeah, like as he was walking out the door, we were seeing on the news that yeah, all the schools would be closed, and yeah, we all know where it went from there. But a year later, I was
Hmm.
accepted into the Society of Saint Joseph of the Sacred Heart, aka the Josephites, and yeah, I studied with them for 2 years. But for me, it was mostly yeah, a vocation that kind of carried over from when I was a Protestant.
Hmm. So are you still discerning with them now? I've discerned out. Where are you in that particular vocational journey?
Yeah, I discerned out of the Josephites in spring 2023, but I am still discerning the priesthood. So stay
Oh,
tuned.
okay. That's interesting. So I previously worked at Salt and Light, and some of my coworkers, uh, I had a gentleman who was in seminary for a few years, left, pursued the vocation of marriage. So that's interesting to know that you were still in that pursuit of just finding the order for you. I'm is it when you discern? I'm actually very fascinated about this process. What is it about a particular religious order versus being a secular priest, like that you feel drawn to, or is that part of your current discernment that you're doing right now?
I guess the main difference for me would be the word that comes to mind is stability, but what I mean by that is geographical stability, which is not
Mm.
what I wanted, to be clear. I know a secular priest, diocesan priest, will stay in one diocese usually, and so that means they're only going to go so far away from whatever the seat of their diocese is. Whereas I didn't really want that. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't really necessarily care to stay in one place for the rest of my life. Like I
Mm.
was totally fine with being sent off to different places to work after a certain period of time. And that's kind of what you're used to in a religious order, many religious orders, is
Mm-hmm.
that, you'll work in a place 5 to 10 years and then you'll go somewhere else. Um, so that was attractive to me. And also just the idea of having a community that was based on a certain activity, a certain charism. So the
Yeah.
Josephites obviously were known for working with African Americans, which is what I want to do. So that
Mm-hmm.
in itself made a lot of sense for me. But really, for anybody who wants to do a specific thing in their vocation, it probably makes sense to look for a religious order that focuses on that thing if it exists. So, yeah, those are
Mm.
to me some major differences between the two. But yeah, I didn't want to
Yeah.
live in one region for the rest of my life.
Even if it's New Orleans.
That is the one place I would consider, I think,
Oh,
or my hometown. But
it
yeah,
yeah. Yeah. No, New Orleans is beautiful. I did my master's thesis film there, and I've told my wife we need to go down there. It's a beautiful city, beautiful culture. When I was last there, I wasn't Catholic, so when I go back, I look forward to going to the cathedral. Strolling through Louis Armstrong Park, getting my beignet from Cafe Du Monde.
absolutely. Yeah, I was the same way. I lived there for several years before I was Catholic, and I thought to myself after I converted, like all those years I was missing out on so much history and fun that was there. Catholic fun.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yes, there is plenty of fun, but yeah, you definitely have to distinguish which is which, particularly if you're down there. So while you were living in New Orleans, you went to Xavier University of Louisiana, right?
So I'm actually still in a program there. It's a summer program called the Institute for Black Catholic Studies. And so when I was in it, it was
Oh,
during the
okay.
pandemic and it was virtual. But now,
Hmm.
it's still going and people come from around the country and beyond every summer for a month to
Tell
do
me,
that.
Yeah, tell me a bit about that program, because I saw that I wasn't sure if you'd completed your theological studies, your master's that you were working on. So I'm curious to know about your studies, that program, and also explain to people why Zula is so unique.
Yeah, so I'm definitely not finished. I've taken a few summers off, hopefully returning this summer. And
Mm.
yeah, the Institute for Black Catholic Studies has multiple programs. One of them is a master's degree in theology. They also have certificate programs and an enrichment program. And that all has developed over the past 40 plus years. They were founded, I think, in the late 70s by a group of Black Catholic academics and advocates who felt that that was really something that was necessary. That was during a period called the Black Catholic movement, when there was like this kind of flourishing of Black Catholic culture in the United States, where Black Catholics were, I'd say, getting more in tune with their history and with Black spirituality writ large, not just limited to what Black Catholics had been doing in the pre-Vatican II Catholic Church, but what Black Christians had believed and done and leaned into for centuries. So, yeah, as they were getting all that, as all that was enriching the Black Catholic community in the United States, they founded this academic program that would kind of keep that flame alive in some ways. So, since then, they've had this program every summer, almost every summer. And yeah, I was like, after I converted, I said, I got to get in on this. And especially during the pandemic when it became virtual, which made it way more accessible. Um, yeah, I jumped right in. But of course, it was founded at Xavier University of Louisiana, which is the first and only um, Catholic HBCU in the United States, historically Black college or university. So um, it's definitely a place you would expect them to have an Institute for Black Catholic Studies. But yeah, it was the school was founded in 1925 by St. Catherine Drexel and the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament, who, like the Josephites, were dedicated to serving African Americans as well as Indigenous Americans. But yeah, those are two religious orders that had that had that focus. And so yeah, 100 years ago they said, there should be a university for with this with this ethos, and they've been around ever since.
So, with this journey of discernment, this journey into Black Catholic studies specifically,
Mm-hmm.
how has your faith been impacted in this journey? Because it feels like there's a fire lit in you, and how yeah how have you been impacted as you've traversed this time period, uh, from discerning with Josephites, from being the president of the National Black Catholic Seminarians, because you're not busy enough. uh, how have you how have you been impacted faith wise?
Yeah, being involved in those different things has been a constant reminder that I'm not alone. It's connected me with a lot of very cool, very loving, very important people in the Black Catholic community and beyond. And that is what a lot of Black Catholics need. It's what I needed because we're not many in this country. And even though everything in the church isn't about culture and ethnicity, that's a part of a person. So when they join something like the Catholic Church, it's good to have that support from people that look like you and maybe have some of the same background and interests. And unfortunately, it is why a lot of people don't stay in the Catholic Church, because they feel that they're not going to find that there, or that they're going to find it much easier somewhere else, which they probably can. But for me, obviously I converted, so I felt there was something about the Catholic Church that was irresistible enough to keep me in it. But on top of that, you also want to feel at home and you want to feel like you have a community even beyond what may be locally available to you. So, yeah, for me, those different programs and organizations gave me community that I don't think I would have otherwise had. And it's really encouraged me to stick to it, to keep believing, to keep pressing forward. I think that's the attitude that the Black Catholics have to have in the United States. Is that
we I'm in Canada, in Toronto, so we have some similarities, some differences, and I when you speak to how few Black Catholics are in there, and that perception that maybe to be Black isn't to be Catholic, it's really that resonates. I've been to the barber shop, and we've they talk about everything under the sun, and when religion comes up and I declare that I'm Catholic, being a Black Catholic, people can rain down on you real heavy. I'm sure what I'm about to say, you've heard some variation. It's like, oh, you go to the church with white Jesus, or that ain't for us, or that sort of thing. And it's this weird adage, and it's really interesting to have to break that down. It's like, hey, out the gate, Catholic means universal. It's that this is for everybody, and it's like people were like, oh, it's Catholic, that's that blonde hair, blue eyed Jesus. It's like, listen, no, we all know that Jesus is from the Middle East, so he's going to have darker features, darker hair. It's like, this is an artist's interpretation, just like we see artist interpretation of Black Jesus, artist interpretation of Korean Jesus, like all these different sort of things. And it's like, these are the gifts. That's the beauty side of the transcendentals, so people can see themselves within it. And it's really interesting that as Black Catholics, whether it's America, Canada, I can't speak for beyond, of my travels are limited, that there aren't a lot of us, depending on your parish, and there's that perception that it's not necessarily for us, which is completely wrong. Here in Toronto, my wife and I's parish is very multicultural, which is that's very peak Canada, peak Toronto. You look across, there's Black, white, Asian, people from Ghana, people from El Salvador, people from Italy, Portugal, France, England. Like it's a big melding pot. So I have that luxury of seeing it very universal, but I understand sometimes my work has taken me away, and I've gone to a Sunday service and I'm like maybe a handful of Black people. So I can definitely understand that sense of culture that you talk about, and that sense of belonging. So that's really great that you've been able to find that through some of the academics, and building that sense of community, and also spreading that to be Catholic is to be Black, and to be Black is to be Catholic. We don't have to walk away from the Eucharist and walk away from all these beautiful gifts that we're given in the Catholic Church.
Amen.
And and I gotta say that I think you do a really great job in sharing culture and community. You being the co-founder of the Black Catholic Messenger, along with Alessandra Harris, and you all have created something very special. I remember seeing it in its early days, and I hadn't seen it for a while. I come back, and it looks no different than the Free Press or the Toronto Star or something like this. You've really grown something quite special. For those who have yet to read Black Catholic Messenger, which you need to, it's going to be in the show notes, so no excuse, click on it, please. Can you speak to your why to starting that, and what maybe speak to the inspiration behind that?
It was good timing. I can say that. I converted at the end of 2019. Pandemic started in 2020, and the George Floyd movement started not long after that. So, as I was kind of coming to terms with this new church I had joined and what I wanted to be in it, there's this huge, nationwide and worldwide racial reckoning happening at the same time. So, what was happening in a microcosm in my life was happening in the world, across religions and cultures and societies. So, as I started to have this idea that there needed to be more, that there needs to be a Black Catholic newspaper, people are in the Catholic Church in the United States are at the same time thinking, well, what are some ways we can improve race relations in the Catholic Church, specifically as it relates to African Americans? So that that was fortuitous. That was divine providence that all happened at the same time. So when I'm asking this question to Black Catholics online, like who wants to help start a newspaper, a Black Catholic newspaper, people like Alessandra, Persuasive Williams, Gunnar Gunderson, Stephen Staten, they pop up and say, "We'll help. I'll help," and so many other people that I can't name all right now. But yeah, it was something that was very necessary at the time, and probably had been necessary for a long time before that. But I'm glad that a group of people all said yes at that time to doing it then and now. Then, because it was the right time to start it. In Catholic media in the United States, there are not very many Black voices individually in different papers and magazines and etc. Like it's just not, our representation is not there. Not even up to the small level of representation we have overall in the church. It's 3 million Black Catholics in the United States out of however many total Catholics there are. We didn't even reach that level of representation, that percentage in Catholic media. So there needed to be a change. And I guess we discerned that the best way to affect that change would be to have our own organization, not just to, flood into white-led newspapers and other media organizations in the church, but to say, we belong too. Black newspapers are nothing new in the United States, so why not a Catholic one? That was kind of my mindset. So yeah, and I think from the last 3+ years, it's shown that we were onto something. There was a lot of stories to be told that were not going to get touched unless Black people got out there and did it themselves.
Yeah. With what are the major issues that you have to grapple with being part of a fledgling media future conglomerate?
Yeah, future conglomerate. I like that. I think a lot of people still don't take us seriously because when you're a small organization, it's hard to get into those spaces that are so accustomed to having just the big name papers or even well-known papers, even if they may not be very big. Breaking into those spaces can be quite hard if you're just getting started, or if you don't have the means to, have seed funding that helps you grow from a small place very quickly. So yeah, we have to take the slow and steady route, and getting that credibility in the eyes of some can be difficult. But overall, I think people have recognized that what we do is unique and needed and effective. So yeah, I really can't complain. But yeah, there's definitely been some challenges along the way.
Yeah. Well, I try to share articles with family because out of my family, I'm actually the only Catholic.
I know the
Um,
feeling.
Probably only yeah, only practicing. Like my dad's side is predominantly Anglican, my mom's side some were baptized Catholic, but couldn't tell you before my wedding when the last time they had been somewhere. So I think seeing that sort of information and representation is important, and it helps those who might be considering, might be discerning, or maybe like those guys in my barbershop who didn't even think we were a thing. So
Yeah.
I definitely have to thank you for the work that you all continue to do. And like I mentioned before, I don't know how you do your level of output. Like I am absolutely floored and flabbergasted. How is it that you're able to continue to churn this out? Is this part of that faith fire that has been put in you? Is this that have you always just been like a prolific writer growing up? Like how are you able to churn out as much as you do?
Certainly never this prolific. I actually didn't write for a long time before I co-founded Black Catholic Messenger. I studied journalism for a year in college and ended up graduating with a degree in religion, and then only sporadically, like very rarely, wrote as a journalist after that. So I think the main reason we're able to keep up a high output is from 2 years of being able to focus completely on that during the pandemic. Um, I lost my job partway through the pandemic, and so Black Catholic Messenger became my full-time job, even though it wasn't generating income like that. But I was able to just focus all my time on it. So that was a major. Well, it just transformed the way I lived my life, so that everything suddenly became centered around Black Catholic Messenger. So maintaining that afterwards was kind of just an afterthought, I guess.
So it's like you're obviously outside of faith, that first and foremost thing that you're focused on.
It's part of my faith, It's all
Oh.
tied up together at this point, I think.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting how that kind of sneaks up on you. I'm curious to know, like, as you grew up, did you ever picture yourself being, or if you could speak to yourself from maybe 10 years ago, would that, and you told that self that, hey, I'm Catholic, I'm discerning the priesthood, I run a Black uh, Catholic focused newspaper.
No, never in a million years. 10 years ago, I was at my most not Catholic and anti-Catholic. I
Mm.
would have never, it would have been an absolutely insane thought to think any of that, and definitely not all combined.
Yeah, I that resonates is all I'll say about that. Especially 10 years prior also. So I understand that piece. As you sort of navigate these waters and you continue to discern, where do you find that your faith sits? Where do you find your heart for Christ sits?
An interesting question. Um, I think the heart of Christ is centered around justice, and that's at this point where my faith is centered. Are we fighting for justice, even in ways that are uncomfortable and inconvenient for many in our society? I think that's where Jesus lived his life, and that's where he is reigning in his kingdom now. So we got to get on the same page. I hope that's where I'm at.
Mm. Amen. Well, I'm curious to know what's the future for Black Catholic Messenger? What's the future for your discernment? What's the future for you? What does that look like?
Oh man, I guess God only knows. I'd like for Black Catholic Messenger to continue to grow, and specifically to grow beyond me. I mean, we already have plenty of writers, but to grow beyond me as its only employee would be great. Um, so that's my dream for Black Catholic Messenger, is to become, a force of its own, that can, of the same stature, I guess you could say, as other Catholic media and other Black newspapers in the United States. So, and as far as discernment, yeah, I want to become a priest. So anybody who hears this, I hope you'll pray for me that that will happen.
That's perfect. And for those who want to support Black Catholic Messenger outside of just readership, where can they go to do that?
BlackCatholicMessenger.org/donate, or you can just go to the main site and see whatever we have there.
Okay, perfect. And I'll put a link for that below so people can just go straight there and not pitch their pennies, pitch their dollars towards BCM.
By all means.
And you you've had a very dynamic journey. Like in a very short time, you've had a very dynamic journey. I'd say 4-5 year span.
Yeah.
You've become Catholic, decided and discerned that you're going to be a priest. You've discerned with one order, on the search for the next, started the Black Catholic Messenger, and I've you. This is a very Canadian thing I'm about to say. You've had that hockey stick of readership where it's just like shot up. You are very much in your vocation as you pursue a vocation, and in sharing the word through your words and promoting justice. For those who are nowhere near that, who are going to mass every Sunday, every other Sunday, they're trying to find a way to light their heart on fire for Christ. What advice can you offer them in that pursuit of a vocation?
Press into everything that the church offers, which is more than Sunday Mass. It's more than the Rosary. Um, there's so much available that the church offers in its teachings, even in your parishes, what they offer. And I think if people, press in a way that can be uncomfortable sometimes, maybe not all their friends are doing it, not all their family, but if they want more of God, um, He's got more to offer. So I think they can press in, they can see what's right for them, where they can serve. That's what the church really needs, is people who are willing to serve. And yeah, the church is doing so much. I mean, we're the largest religion in the world. It's crazy to think about, but there are opportunities to do whatever it is God is calling people to do. And sometimes it may not always be clear to them where God wants them to serve, but He does want them to do something. So do something.